Oh my gosh, you guys. I don't care if I'm out sick today. I'm just so excited about all the cool things I'm going to do. Like, I really, I want to be like teacher of the year. I mean, I know like there are all these United teachers that are like teacher of the year. And I think, well, it's about my time to do that. And then I'm going to go like make the world a better place by like making children's hospitals really cool and comfortable for kids. And then like I'm going to totally write a book about all my experiences teaching. And I'm just like an awesome mom, and I'm going to start sewing clothes for my kids, and then I think I'm going to take up knitting. Oh, wait a second. That's not me. That's somebody else. What I just gave you an example of is what someone who has bipolar might feel during their manic depressive phase of the illness. As this quote here says from someone with bipolar disorder, it's an illness that on the one hand feels is biological in its origins, but feels psychological in the experience of it. It brings in conferring advantage and pleasure. When someone is in their manic phase of the illness, they're really excited and happy oftentimes. Now, sometimes they can be irritable, but they often feel that they can conquer the world. And but then when they get into their depressive phase, it's an illness that can bring in its wake almost unendurable suffering. So my goal for you in this part of the PowerPoint, and I don't know if I'm going to have to go into two PowerPoints or not, but my goal for you is to talk to you a little bit about bipolar disorder. Now, the symptoms of bipolar disorder, of course, are periods of depression alternating with periods of mania. Depression is like what we talked about in class yesterday, the lack of self-esteem, the low energy, feelings of worthlessness and guilt. And for someone with full-on bipolar disorder, they are very, very debilitating symptoms. The cycle length varies. Some people say that they vary from a hypermania into depression mid-sentence. Jane Pauley, who was a famous newscaster, had very variable lengths of cycle. But some are long cyclers where they go a couple of months in one cycle and then suddenly switch to their other cycle. It's unpredictable, and the cycle length does vary quite a bit from individual to individual. Now, mania, what is this like? For the person who is in their manic phase, so remember, bipolar is two poles. One pole is depression, the other pole is mania. For one who is in their manic phase, their mood is highly elevated, euphoric, although they might be to the point of being irritable. But one person that I know that has bipolar, she was just a very highly energetic, positive, happy person during her manic phase. She was very grandiose, admittedly. She thought she could do anything, to the point sometimes of being delusional and even detached from reality. So in the days of old, sometimes this cognition of grandiosity and delusional thinking might be confused for schizophrenia. So sometimes people in the early 20th century were confused with having schizophrenia when they were in the manic phase of their bipolar. Their motivation is their hyperactivity is very intrusive and domineering. It can be really difficult for families because they can be compulsive and reckless during this time, and they may in fact need to have their accounts managed closely, and they might be reckless even sexually. They might feel like they can be promiscuous without consequence. They have a lessened need for sleep, and I mentioned in one of my classes, but not all of them, my student assistant Sarah a few years ago, she said, please tell your students that when I was a junior in college and I realized I only needed an hour of sleep per night, that I knew that I had learned about this thing called bipolar in my AP psychology class, and I realized that I probably had bipolar disorder. And indeed she did, and she went in for treatment, and she is now doing very, very well and managing her bipolar illness very well and working as a neuroscientist. Now, how often does bipolar disorder occur? And by the way, please do stop this video to catch up with notes when you need to. 1 to 2% of the U.S. population will have bipolar disorder. That means out of every 1 to 200 people in your class of maybe 600 to 700 people, you'll have 6 or 7 people that will have bipolar disorder. there is usually a sudden onset with no obvious precipitating events. Now, disorders like dissociative disorder or OCD will oftentimes have an event that will signal or that will actually be a catalyst for that event to start occurring. But in bipolar, it is a very biological illness, and it will usually occur for the first time between the ages of 20 and 30 years old. It may start with the manic event, in which sometimes people do think it is schizophrenia, or it may start with the depressive event, in which people think is major depression until the individual becomes hypermanic. Now, there's a milder form of bipolar, and this form is called cyclothymic disorder, or bipolar 2. Cyclothymic disorder is alternating episodes of mild depression with what we call hypomania, hypo meaning a lowered form of the mania that lasts for about 2 years. People with cyclothymic disorder will have mood swings that are more dramatic than the mood swings that we see in bipolar disorder. Now, keep in mind, it is very, very, very uncommon to have any form of bipolar or cyclothymic disorder diagnosed before the age of 18, and it is in fact considered by many to be unwise or unethical even to do so, because the teenage years with fluctuations of hormones are going to cause mood disorders that could be confused with bipolar. So if you're going through a phase of extreme mood swings, please do not be concerned that you do have bipolar disorder, because it is something that is not generally diagnosed before the age of 18. Now, what are the causes of mood disorders? First of all, genetic predispositions show in twin studies, especially bipolar, there was actually a genetic study done, or a family study done, out of an Amish community that had a strong bipolar tendency throughout the family tree. And this was one of those seminal studies that showed that bipolar disorder in particular runs in families. But we also know and have identified in recent years a serotonin transporter genotype, as illustrated by this chart. Now, what this shows is that the number of stressful life experiences or events that people experience, if they have this particular type of genotype, the people with the serotonin transporter genotype, that they will have a greater likelihood of developing a type of mood disorder depending on the number of stressful life events that they experience. So getting up to 3 and 4 stressful life experiences, they are more likely to develop a new disorder. These can include things like a job loss, a loss in the family, or any other kind of major life experience, a major health crisis, etc. Hello, AP Psychology students. This is Mrs. Mathers. I am coming to you via Screencast today,